Hello, and welcome to the Her Head in Films podcast. I'm your host. My name is Caitlin. This is a podcast in which I share my personal musings on cinema. If you've never listened before, you might be wondering who I am. As I said, my name is Caitlin. Basically, I'm a writer, I'm a dreamer. I love literature, I love art, and I really love cinema. I'm like I have a mad, furious passion for cinema, art house cinema, foreign cinema, and so this podcast is a way for me to share my love of films. I created this podcast because I live in a very rural area in the South, in the United States. I don't really, I don't really have anyone to share my thoughts about films. I also have a book podcast because literature is a big part of my life as well, and I'll put the description of the link to that in the description. But yeah, I don't have an art house cinema where I live. I barely have a bookstore where I live, so I don't have that sort of culture around me. So I needed an outlet to talk about these films that sort of consume me and haunt me. And so that's why I created this podcast. If you're wondering about the title comes from an email that I sent a friend a few years ago, and I was really obsessed with movies at the time. But what's new? And and I said, my head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films. It was it was just something I wrote in the moment, as a joke, I guess, and it's just something that sort of has stayed with me since then. And when I was thinking about starting this podcast, I started this podcast in the hellscape of 2016. I'm pretty sure I started it last year. I think so. Um, and so, what was I going to say? Maybe I started it this year. I can't remember now. um, I've done about 12 episodes so far. And when I was thinking about starting the podcast, I thought about that line. My head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films. And so it seemed like the perfect way to sum up how I feel about cinema and how I'm sort of always thinking about it, how it's always on my mind, how it really imprints itself upon the mind. These images, these stories. So, yeah, I mean, that's the backstory. I guess it's sort of long winded, but I just wanted you to have as much information as you could. And today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my favorite film by my favorite director, and that film is The Double Life of Veronique by Polish director Krzysztof Kieślowski. And I rewatched the film last night. I watched it originally in 2011 when I started to discover and explore art house cinema. And it was a revelation for me. It was life changing. There is who I was before this film and who I was after. I usually try to watch it once a year, if not more. And so I did watch it last night, and so I'm going to talk about that. And so I will get to that in a moment. First, I like to start the podcast with just talking about more general, personal things about my life. It's just something that I like to do. So I want to talk about why I watched the film last night, because this film sort of becomes a lifeline for me at certain moments in my life. And yesterday, let me look at the date. I don't even know what date it is most of the time. Today's April 28th, 2017. I watched it last night, so April 27th. And I've been struggling lately. Although what's new, I sort of am always struggling in life. In the previous podcast where I talked about Satyajit Ray's The Big City, if you've listened to that episode, if not, you can listen to it if you would like. I talked about how I have trouble living outside of art. And by that I mean that I love reading books, I love watching films, but there is a point where those end. You know, a book begins and it ends, a film begins and it ends, and you have to find a way to navigate life in between art, in between your experiences of art. And so I find, having to live in those spaces, the space where I have to be in the world, I find that really difficult. And I struggle with mental illness like anxiety and depression that stems from the death of my father in 2006 when I was 16 years old. That really exacerbated a lot of my depression and anxiety because it was such a catastrophic event. And I was very close to him and loved him very much. And I think when you're a teenager, it's just, you're not fully formed. You're this very inchoate being, and you're not sure who you are, and it's just, you don't have the means to cope. You just don't, especially if you don't have a lot of money and you don't have access to resources like I didn't. I mean, therapy wasn't an option for me. I had no help really. I still don't. And when you're poor, the world just doesn't care about your problems, and the world doesn't care about your pain. And so you find a way to just survive the best that you can. I also struggle with chronic pain, chronic health issues. Once again, not having money, I don't have any kind of access to find relief from those things. So I just survive the best way I can, and often my survival mechanism is books, or it's films, or it's music, or something like that. And so it's very difficult to live in this world, and I've always said this, I've always felt this, that I don't fit in the world. This world was not made for someone like me. I am not going to make it. I cannot make it in this world. I am too sensitive. I am too tender. I'm too dreamy, I guess you could say, in a way. And so I feel really crushed at times by certain burdens, like having to have an income and having to find a way to make money, and financial issues and financial stress and worries. And those things really weigh on me, and they're very difficult for me to cope with, because in our society, in capitalism, and throughout the world, your worth and your value is connected to how much you produce, and whether you can make money, and whether you can hold down a job. And of course, some of us are not able-bodied, and some of us struggle to do those things, and nobody cares. You still have to live with it. You still have to find a way to survive. And I just feel that crushing pressure all the time, and that worry and that stress, and you know so I was feeling that in particular yesterday, and probably for the last week or so, or you know I get really broken down, and really just, it's hard. It's really, really hard. You might can hear it in my voice, the way it wears me down, and how I just feel so, empty sometimes, and I don't know what to do, but I do my best. And so yesterday I just felt like I needed a film that was gonna sort of give me life again. And so I immediately thought of the Double Life of Veronique. I thought, well, I'd like to explore this further. I'd like to, you know, I would like to watch the film again because I hadn't seen it in a while. I don't know if I watched it last year. I mean, I try to watch it every year, but I don't know if I actually do. So let's talk about the film. I recently I started a subscription to a new streaming site, and it's called Filmstruck. It's a partnership between Turner Classic Movies and the Criterion Collection. For those of you outside the U.S., the Turner Classic Movies is a television channel here in the States, and it shows classic and foreign cinema commercial free. So it's a TV channel that is pretty important to a lot of cinephiles like me, and it's often sort of the first way that people encounter classic films, maybe like Hitchcock. Um, or, I mean, I don't think it shows a lot of world cinema. I didn't really discover world cinema as much through Turner Classic Movies, but I certainly did fall in love with movies through the channel, and saw a lot of important films that had an impact on me, one of which was The Passion of Joan of Arc by Carl Theodor Dreyer. And what else? I love Brief Encounter by David Lean. I remember watching that. And they always had these great introductions by the late Robert Osborne, who is a very beloved person, and I hate that he's gone. That made me really, really sad, because he was a really important part of my childhood, and I used to have when I was a kid, I had a TV in my room, and I would have the TV on at night, and I would often go to sleep with the sounds of classic cinema, and it would bathe my room in that television light. And so that's a good memory, really, now that I think about it. And so they're part of this site, and then the Criterion Collection, which is I believe it is a distribution company for a lot of classic and international world cinema. And it's a pretty prestigious, distribution company. So they've partnered up to do Filmstruck, and if you want both of them together, I think it's like $10.99. If you just want Filmstruck, which is the Turner Classic Movie side, I think it's $7 or $8.99. I don't know. Um, but it's a really great site. I don't say that as because I'm being paid to or told to, or I don't get anything. I mean, Filmstruck doesn't know who I am, okay? I'm nobody. I'm just telling you a service that I use, and that if you're in the U.S., it might interest you. I think for that $10.99, you get a lot. You don't just get these films. With the Criterion Collection and also with the TCM side of Filmstruck, you're getting the extras. You're getting the documentaries, you're getting interviews, you're getting specials, and that's what I got with the Double Life of Veronique. I mean, I haven't gone through all of the stuff yet, but it was really, really amazing. It's all the extras that you get with these different films. If you like your Tarkovsky, if you like your Ingmar Bergman, if you like your Robert Bresson or your Godard or your Truffaut or your Jean Renoir, this is the website you need to have, because Netflix, Hulu, I don't think they're anywhere near what they should be when it comes to foreign and classic films. I mean, I don't even think they try at this point. I mean, there's some okay films on Netflix and Hulu. I'm not putting it down completely, but it's not where something like Filmstruck is. If you are really passionate about art house cinema, I don't know how you cannot use the website if you have the means, if you have the money to do that. It's a great investment. I mean, I used to get DVDs in the days before the internet. I used to go to Blockbuster, like in the early 2000s, and they would have a special, like 4 or 5 DVDs for $20, and that's how I built up my DVD collection. And I loved to get the DVDs that had like the special features, like the audio commentary or the little documentaries. Like I had a DVD of Sophie's Choice that had a documentary that had like interviews with Meryl Streep and Kevin Kline and William Styron, who wrote the book Sophie's Choice, that the film was based on. I loved that stuff. I ate it up. I love all that extra stuff and all that behind the scenes information that you get. So Filmstruck's been kind of a dream come true for me. and I've already got like 50 films in my watch list. It's already out of control. Like I don't even know where to start at this point. I don't even know what to do. I feel a little bit overwhelmed with it, but okay. I'm going on tangents, I know, but so why do I love this film? Why do I turn to this film? What is this film about? So many questions that I'm sure you would like me to answer. Um, so the backstory is I'm 27, by the way. I'm not a spring chicken or anything. I mean, 27. I don't know how to deal with aging. It's hard. But I started getting really interested in art house cinema and foreign cinema in 2011. So I was what? Oh God, I was like 21. I was in college. Um, a person that I met through Tumblr, a really nice girl who is Polish, or she's from Poland. Her parents are Polish. I think I asked her. I had seen Chris Marker's La Jetée, and I got really interested in foreign film, and I was like, ooh, I like this film. A few years earlier, I had seen The Passion of Joan of Arc by Carl Theodor Dreyer. That is one of my favorite films, and it was absolutely my obsession. But I didn't have the internet at that time. That was pre 2011, pre 2010. So I didn't. I loved The Passion of Joan of Arc, but I didn't necessarily have any way to access foreign films or foreign cinema. But in 2011, I had a laptop. I had access more to the internet, and at the time, the Criterion Collection was on Hulu, and so I got more interested in foreign films, and I think I just asked her or something. I was like, what are some films that you recommend? She seemed to be someone who was really knowledgeable about French cinema and about, different, world cinema. And she mentioned The Double Life of Veronique by Krzysztof Kieślowski. So I was like, okay. I think it was on Hulu at the time. Or maybe I've found it on YouTube, who knows. Had never heard of this person, this Kieślowski. Who is this? Well, I watched the film. I am blown away. I don't even know how to describe it. But as I said before, there is who I was before this film and who I was after. Because this was in the embryonic stage of me watching art house cinema. The very early stages. I think later I would go on to see La Ventura, which is a huge major movie for me as well. But The Double Life of Veronique was crucial. So, what is this film about? This film is about two women. It's about the first third of the film is about a girl named Veronika who lives in Poland. She's an opera singer. She has a heart condition. And while she's singing, she ends up dying. The last two thirds of the film are about Veronique. A young woman lives in France, is a music teacher. They are played by the same actress, Irene Jacob. They both look alike, these women, obviously, and yet they're in different countries. They've never met, they don't know each other, and yet they sense one another. They sense that the other exists. At one point at the beginning of the film, Veronica's talking to her father and says, I have this strange feeling like I'm not alone in the world. She senses that this Veronique, this doppelganger, this woman that looks like her and has a similar life to her, exists. And when Veronica dies, Veronique is in the middle of making love with her boyfriend, and all of a sudden she becomes sad, and she says, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm in grief. I feel like I'm grieving. So they sense one another. That's sort of the gist of the film. There's other things that happen, but there's not necessarily an elaborate plot. The thing about, you see, I'm struggling to even talk about the film. The thing about Kieślowski's cinema, and a little bit of background on Kieślowski, he was a Polish director. He was from Poland. He did the Decalogue in the late 1980s, which I have an episode about the Decalogue, which was a 10-part TV series, and each episode was loosely based on the Ten Commandments. Um, in the 1990s, he made Veronique, and he made something called the Three Colors Trilogy. And each film, red, white, and blue, represented a color in the French flag: liberty, égalité, fraternité. He's very well known for those films, and he has influenced and impacted a huge amount of filmmakers. He died, I think, in 1996 from a heart attack. I think he was only in his 50s. But he is an important director. He's considered an auteur, a genius, you know. And so Veronique is very much a transitional film for him, because in the late 1980s he does the Decalogue. Before the Decalogue, he did very hard hitting social realist documentaries about the conditions that people lived under in communist Poland. But at some point, he can no longer do that. He doesn't want to make those documentaries anymore. Feels like he's exploiting people through them. He just doesn't want anything to do with it anymore. So he does the Decalogue in 88, 89, and that airs on Polish television and is quite popular. But then in the 90s, with the Three Colors trilogy, his films will be based outside of Poland. He will eventually leave Poland to make these films, and Veronique is sort of in between that period. So you have Veronica, who's in Poland, and then you have Veronique, who's in France. And why does this film mean so much to me? You know, yesterday when I was feeling sad, and I still feel sad. I always feel sad, really, to some extent. When you go through certain kinds of grief and trauma and loss, there's something in you that's forever changed. You can never really be the person that you were before. And so you just somehow you find a way to continue. I mean, some people don't, some people can't. But some people have to find a way to live. And I feel really grateful that I've discovered art house cinema or world cinema, because I feel like this has become something life affirming and something life sustaining for me. And when Veronica says that at the beginning, she says, I feel like I'm not alone in the world. Well, for me, it's cinema. Cinema itself makes me feel like I'm not alone in the world. It makes me feel like there's other people out there who maybe understand. Because when you watch a director's work, when you watch Bresson, when you watch Ingmar Bergman, when you watch Kieślowski, when you watch Agnes Varda or Andrea Arnold, when you watch these people and they are reflecting something about your life or something about your experience or something that you've thought or struggled with, that does make you feel less alone. That does make you feel like there's somebody else that understands your struggle and understands. I mean, of course, these stories that are made are very specific in one way, but that doesn't mean they can't resonate and connect with people outside their countries. I think Kieślowski talked about this. There's a documentary on Filmstruck about the making of the Double Life of Veronique, and I haven't watched it yet. I want to, but I did see the first few minutes, and he says, I made these films about Poland, made these films about Polish people in a Polish society with very Polish problems, within a certain context of Poland. But he said, but they were able to be universal in a way that there were people outside of Poland who watched the Decalogue and watched some of his films, or like Blind Chance. I really like Blind Chance, which explores the three different fates that a man could have had based on whether he had caught a train or not. So Kieślowski himself recognized that even though he was making stories about Polish people, that some of the themes and some of the things that he was exploring could connect to other people outside of that particular culture. And that's something that I talked about in my previous podcast about Sacha Ray's The Big City, where this is a very specific story about an Indian family. It's about a woman, a housewife, who, because of her family's financial troubles, has to go out and get a job, and how her getting a job affects her family and how it affects her. And it was made in 1963. So it's a film about class. It's a film about, you know, family. It's a film about a lot of things. And even though it takes place in India and it's about an Indian family, there are parts of it that you can connect to. And of course, I don't want to universalize everything. As I talked about in the previous episode, there's this great, essay that I read recently about Moonlight, Barry Jenkins's film, and how, you know, she was critiquing the way in which people try to say that the film is universal, and how by saying it's universal, you can erase the very specific issues in the film about, racism, homophobia, poverty, and so on. And I think that's an important argument. But at the same time, I do think there are these films that are made all around the world. Recently I watched a film that was set in Singapore that was really about class. It was called Ilo Ilo by Anthony Chin, and it's about this Filipino maid that goes to work for a family in Singapore, and the dynamics of that. And so it's very much about class, and so these stories are set in very specific worlds and very specific cultures, but they reach beyond that sometimes, or you find something in them that's very interesting and how it makes you see your life differently. So I think that's really important. It's an important part of it. But how do I talk about the double life of Veronique? In this film, Kieślowski has really created a cinematic language to talk about things that are not easily expressible, to talk about things like intuition, to talk about things like fate, to talk about things like feeling and emotion and spirituality and something mystical. And I was lucky enough to watch the film last night with audio commentary. And the audio commentary, let me look at my notes. The audio commentary was by Annette Insdorf, and she actually knew Kieślowski. She translated for him at times when he was maybe at a film festival or doing an interview. She wrote a book about him. You can probably search for it on Amazon. Annette Insdorf, Insdorf. And she did this exquisite commentary of this film that gave me sort of a whole new perspective. And she shared all kinds of tidbits and like facts and like factoids that I didn't know. And so that was a really great experience to learn more about Kieślowski. And so, and she talked a lot about this, about how it's about Kieślowski is considered sort of a spiritual director, a mystical director. The themes that he deals with are metaphysical, and like I said, he often deals with things that are beyond the scientific, beyond the empirical. And that's a hard thing to talk about. Like, his films really have to be experienced, they have to be seen, because he's doing things with cinema itself, with the imagery. and it's a sort of poem in a way when you watch it. And he has these repetitions. He has these symbols that recur throughout the film. He has these colors that recur throughout the film. You know, there's things like mirrors and windows, and um, you know, both Veronica and Veronique use lip balm, for instance, and there's a string of different things that connects them. So there's all these. It's the imagery, really. That's what connects it all. And so in that way, you really have to watch it for yourself. But both of these women do not have mothers. Their mothers died when they were young, I guess, and they only have their fathers. And so their fathers are very much a part of the film a bit. And see, I'm like totally struggling to talk about this film because it's it's one that you have to watch. And so what do I want to say about this film? Insdorf tells the story in the audio commentary of a 15-year-old girl who, I'm not sure if she spoke to Kieślowski or she wrote to Kieślowski about the Double Life of Veronique, but she told him that the film made her believe that there could be something called a soul. And I think that pretty much sums up the way I feel about this film, is that when you watch it, the questions that it raises, the way that it makes you feel, there's a magic about this film. And it is art in that way for me, because there is something transcendent about it. It does make you wonder if we have a soul. Like, I used to say this about Tori Amos's music. Like, I used to like write this. I don't know if I've ever told anyone it, but I used to like write in my journal or whatever about Tori Amos, who I love. She's a singer songwriter. She was very well known in the 90s. I don't know if people know of her as much now, but this she's my everything. She's like my number one singer, like, that I listen to. It's her. She is my goddess. And I also love Cat Power, and you know, she's up there too. Cat Power and Tori Amos are my everything. But I used to say that Tori Amos made me believe that there could be a God, because this woman is so otherworldly and she's so ethereal, and she taps into something that is beyond this world. I always felt that way about Tori Amos, especially the albums she put out in the 1990s, like Little Earthquakes, Under the Pink, From the Choir Girl Hotel. Those especially, and the B-sides and some of those songs that she was creating. And I would say the same for Kieślowski. I would say that his films, especially Veronique, but you could also say it about Blue, or Three Colors Blue, or Three Colors Red, or even Decalogue. These films make you feel like there could be something beyond the visible, that there could be something beyond what you are seeing, beyond the rational, beyond the explicable. And they deal with themes of fate and chance and the unseen connections between people and how we are interconnected with one another. Because there is a scene in the Double Life of Veronique where Veronica and Veronique meet, and Veronica is the only one that sees it. Um, Veronique, the French one, is on a bus. She's in Krakow, and I guess she's touring Krakow as a tourist, you know, and she has her camera out, and she takes this picture, and she doesn't even realize that she's taking a picture of Veronica. It's just in this area where there's a lot of people, and she doesn't even recognize or realize the moment when it's happening, that she has encountered her doppelganger, right? And so, but Veronica does. Veronica sees her, and she sees this woman that looks just like her, and she's just sort of frozen and amazed by it. And that's the only time these two women come in contact with each other. And so, you know, I think Kieślowski is asking questions about identity and about connection. I mean, when there's so many scenes in the film where there's windows that reflect either Veronica or Veronique's image, their faces. There are mirrors. They'll look in the mirror. I feel like he's asking questions about identity, about what would it mean if there was somebody that looked like us, that had a similar life to us. What if we're not as unique as we like to think that we are? I've always been interested in this idea of the doppelganger. I still remember years ago I read about it in a book. I think it was a book about ghost stories or something. And I don't know, I just learned this term doppelganger. I was like, what? What is this? What is this doppelganger? And then it really started to fascinate me. Like, what if there was this girl in some other part of the world that looked like me, that talked like me, that we had never met, and yet we are similar? And something that has obsessed me in, I guess, the last few years, or maybe even since my father died, is this idea of what if I met someone that looked like my father? What would I do? How would that affect me? It wouldn't be him, but it would look like him. And you think of how attached you are to the way people look. I mean, we love people for who they are, but you get attached to their face, their body, the way they look. And I always used to wonder about that. And like, how would I handle it? What would I do? And so it's always been something that's really interested me, this idea of somebody looking like myself or looking like somebody that I loved. And there was actually someone that did a project like this. I'm looking at, yeah. Mariella Sankari. She did this project where she put an ad in the newspaper for men that looked a certain way and were a certain age, and she was looking for lookalikes of her father, her dead father. She had lost her father years before, or I think she lost him when she was younger, and so she was always wondering what he would look like if he had become old, if he had gotten to 60 or 70 years old. And this was something that always interested me. Her project was called Moises. I guess that maybe was her father's name. And it's so interesting to think about, isn't it? Like, what would you do if you actually encountered someone that looked like you know? And and I thought that, and she took photographs of the men, and they were wearing, I think she even put them in her father's clothes as well. And so it's this very interesting, eerie sort of photography project that has always sort of obsessed me in a way. And so what you have with the Double Life of Veronique, you have something kind of similar. These two women that look alike, and they feel each other's presence, and they feel this connection to each other that they can't explain. Because all of us, or most of us, have had experiences in our lives that we could not explain. And I'm a very secular person. I'm a very non-religious person. I consider myself an atheist. But I myself have had experiences that I couldn't explain, when I had feelings about things, and then certain events would take place. And and to go back to the doppelganger, I used to, when I was like 8 or 9, I went to church with my childhood friend, and we used to go to church on Sundays. And there was this old man that used to be there, and he would sometimes hold the door open for people, and he would hand out gum, like juicy fruit, to the kids. And one day I realized that he looked like my great grandfather who had died. And my great grandfather died when I think I was like in first grade, so I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I didn't know him that well, but I did used to visit him in the nursing home where he was staying. And so I still remember as a child seeing this man who looked like my great grandfather, my mother's grandfather, and it just freaked me out in a way, and yet it was fascinating. It was like, here is this man who looks like my great grandfather, and yet these two men have never met, and they don't know each other, but they could have similar lives. So it's that sort of irrational, inexplicable thing that happens, and I think that's what Kieślowski is trying to sort of tap into and explore, is are these questions that we can't put into words, and it's these feelings that we get, and it's beyond empirical data, it's beyond science. And I think for him to explore those issues, especially in the world today, I mean, I don't think a lot of directors are posing these very mystical, metaphysical, spiritual questions. I mean, the person that comes to mind for me is Terrence Malick, who whose film The Tree of Life means a lot to me, and it's one of my favorite films as well. I would say my favorite film, it's a tie actually between many films, between La Ventura, between The Tree of Life, between La Jetée, between The Passion of Joan of Arc and The Double Life of Veronique. And some of these films are posing these larger questions. I mean, you could even say about La Ventura, it's a mysterious film. It's a film that is an experience. It's a film that is a feeling. I think I tweeted that once. It's, I mean, I wouldn't say that's a spiritual film, but it's a mysterious film. And it's the same way with The Double Life of Veronique. Is this is a mysterious film, and that mystery consumes you. These two women and their connection and the way they feel each other and the way they reflect each other, it is a mystery that will consume you. And it's a visually stunning film. It's probably one of the most beautiful films I've encountered. There's this lens that the cinematographer uses that almost turns things green at times. This very vibrant green that I have yet to see in any other film. It's a poetic, dreamy sort of film. And if you think about cinema, cinema deals with dreams. Cinema deals with the unconscious. Cinema deals with, I guess, fantasy and what is beyond this world. And it takes you into this place that is outside everyday reality. And I think that's what Kieślowski does in Veronique. And I think why I needed that film yesterday especially was I needed that magic. And there is this gorgeous scene in the film of a marionette, because the French Veronique, she works as a music teacher, and this man named Alexander, who is a puppeteer, he comes to the school and he does this show for the kids about a dancer who dies, and she is resurrected as a butterfly, or comes back to life as a butterfly. And I didn't know this, but Annette Ensdorf in the audio commentary shared that when we see that marionette scene, which is a very important scene to me, and is one of the most enchanting things that I've ever come across in my life. That's what I love about Kieślowski's films, especially Veronique, is that there's a whimsy to it. There's this magic and this whimsical beauty to this film, and you see that in the marionette scene. It's quite enchanting, and but it's not the actor who's playing Alexander who is actually doing the marionette scene, even though he plays the puppeteer. It's actually the puppeteer Bruce Schwartz, who I think is pretty well known as a puppeteer, And so it's actually his hands that you're seeing in the film. And I thought that was like a little interesting tidbit, like I had no idea. I had no idea that that was Bruce Schwartz, but it is. So, and that is one of the most magnificent scenes in a film ever for me. I still remember watching it, and I just remember like I was like, "Oh my god, my heart soared." I was like, "What is this?" I was so enchanted. This whole film just enchants me to no end. And the depth of this film, the genius of this film, it's all in the details. It's all in just the beauty of this film. And another thing that Insdorf talks about is how Veronica and Veronique, they both have close relationships to their fathers, and Kieślowski includes this in several of his films, most notably in one of the episodes of the Decalogue. And Insdorf says that that actually was probably inspired by his own life, because he had a very close relationship to his own daughter. They were very, very close. And I thought that was like a nice little detail, because I wonder if unconsciously this is something else that I like about the film, that it has this father daughter relationship in the film, and that is a relationship that I no longer have. That relationship is gone for me forever because my father's gone. And so often I have to sort of vicariously live through these films. So I still struggle when I see a father and daughter together, whether it be in a film, a TV show, or in everyday life. It's something that I still struggle with. Um, it's been 11 years, but it's not something that I ever get used to or that I ever accept, really. I just, I really can't bear that he's not alive, and I really do struggle with it. And that's just the reality of my life and something that I have to live with. I remember a few years ago, I was watching this film, this German film called Requiem. I don't know the actress's name, but she is the actress who was in Tony Erdmann, which you might have heard about recently. And she's in this film Requiem. She plays this woman who is having sort of profound psychological issues and thinks that she might be sort of possessed. It's not a horror film though. It's sort of like Emily, the Haunting of Emily Rose or something like that. It's a little bit like that, in that it's she has something maybe psychologically wrong with her, and she doesn't know what's happening to her, and she's very scared about it. And I just remember watching this film. It was a very powerful film, and it's one of those like that sort of fall under the radar, but you watch it and you're like, and you'll think about it for years later. You know what I mean? And so there was this scene, and I watched this probably in 2010 or 11, and there's this scene where she hugs her father, and I've always remembered it. And I watched this scene, and she's just hugging her father, and I like wept. I just wept. It was like years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, and I just cried over this scene of this woman, hugging her father, because that, I don't get to have that anymore. So that was really hard for me to like even watch. So I wonder if maybe I also like this film because of Veronique and Veronica's relationships with their fathers. I think that could be part of it, and I think it's really sweet that Kieślowski was close to his own daughter. And we lost Kieślowski much too early. He died in like 1996 in his 50s. It's very eerie that he died from heart issues. He had a heart surgery or heart operation that didn't go too well, and he died as a result. And in The Double Life of Veronique, both Veronique and Veronica have heart conditions, and Veronica actually dies because of her heart condition. So and Insdorf talks about this too, how eerie it is that, just a few years later, after making Veronique, that, Kieślowski himself would succumb to heart issues. And I wish he was still with us. I really wonder what he would have made, what he would have done. I really think about his genius, and I wish I could like get inside his mind and see like where did these ideas come from? Where did how do you even come up with this? And something that Annette Insdorf in the audio commentary talked about was, even though Kieślowski is considered an auteur, where we tend to think of the auteur as the artist and he controls everything, and the film is sort of his singular vision, Kieślowski really enjoyed collaborating with people. Before the film even started, he collaborated, of course, with his co-writer, but also with his cinematographer, with the brilliant composer Zbigniew Preisner, who did the soundtrack for the Double Life of Veronique, as well as Decalogue, as well as the Three Color Trilogy. And so I didn't know this, but the music in the film was not made after the film was made. The music preceded the making of the film, and the music is just gorgeous. This gorgeous opera music. It feels like it feels like this old gorgeous music, and it's just perfect. And another interesting thing that I learned in the audio commentary by Annette Insdorf was that even though Irene Jacob learned Polish fluently to play Weronika, who lived in Poland, she had an accent in her Polish, and so they did have to dub her. They dubbed her singing, of course, but they also dubbed her dialogue when she was doing the Polish part, which I had no idea. I mean, it's that seamless. I had a feeling that wasn't her singing, but I thought that the dialogue was her, but she said that they did dub that. So I thought that was sort of interesting. And so this film, as I say, it's a very magical film. It's not often that you come across a film like this, and I really, for me, Kieślowski is everything. He is the genius. He is like the pinnacle of cinema for me. And I don't know how many people agree. I mean, I think everybody has that sort of director soulmate. Just that soulmate where it's like this director and his films or her films, they are everything. You may feel it about Agnes Varda. You may feel it about Robert Bresson or Ozu or Tarkovsky, Chantal Akerman, Martin Scorsese. The list goes on. Everybody has that one person, or Truffaut or Godard, where their films are like life to you. They're like life giving, and they're your obsession. I mean, for those of us who are cinephiles, right? Cinemaniacs, as I like to say. I'm a cinemaniac. Everybody has that director, who is, it could be Antonioni, it could be Rossellini, it could be De Sica. I really love De Sica. It could be Kiarostami. There's a wealth out there for you to choose from. But when you find that person, you feel like some missing part of your life has been put into place, and you feel like this is it. You know what I mean? Because I am a dreamer. I am a dreamy person. I am someone who I am, and I have said this in my podcast before. I Films are sort of intuition for me. They're instinctive to me. I feel things. I'm very much about feelings, about the personal, about subjectivity, and things like that. And so I think that's what I love about Kieślowski's work. And I'm interested in fate, and I'm interested in chance, and I'm interested in the unseen connections between people. And I'm interested in these things that we feel that we can't express. I'm interested in the unsayable and the inexpressible, because I've often talked about this, that when I read a book or when I watch a film or anything else I do in my life, it's like it's an experience. It's something that I feel, and it's like I don't know how to translate those feelings into something that other people can comprehend or can understand. I just believe strongly that there are things that are maybe irrational, or things that you can't put into words, and things that you feel that you can't really transmit. Just like when Veronica says, it's a strange feeling, but I feel like I'm not alone in the world. She can't put into words what she feels. She can't even begin to comprehend what is going on outside of her. And it's the same with Veronique when she feels that Veronica has died. She can't even talk about it. She just can only say, I feel this sense of grieving. I feel this grief in me, and I don't know why, you know. And and so Kieślowski, he he engages with these very big, unanswerable, massive questions about humanity, about existence, about emotion and feeling, and the spiritual and the metaphysical. And that appeals to me. Those are things that I myself am interested in. And and so for me, he is that director that is really a touchstone, and is really um, just, he's the one. You know what I mean? He is the one. And I hope to read more about him and learn more about him. And I'd love to read Annette Insdorf's book. And there's like several books that I've put on my Amazon wish list now that I would like to get eventually, because I really do want to know more about the way his mind worked. And I would just I just want to know more about him and about these films, because I can't even put into words these films and the way they make me feel. And it really it really is just, when you come in contact with something like this, when you when you have this experience with a director or with a film that is unlike anything you've ever had. And I would say The Passion of Joan of Arc was a similar experience by Carl Theodor Dreyer. That seeing that film, seeing Maria Falconetti's face, I mean, it still haunts me. I still just think about it, and it's like part of me. What's fascinating about cinema, about these films, is the way these images and these stories become part of you. How you can look at something and it'll remind you of something from a film. Like when it snows, I think of Jonathan Glazer's film Birth, which I'd like to do a podcast about eventually. If you've seen Birth, then you know what I'm talking about. When I see a donkey, I think of Bresson's Balthazar. I think of these things. So, when I see a sugar cube, I think of Kieślowski in Three Colors Blue, when there's this amazing scene where Juliette Binoche puts a sugar cube in her coffee or her tea, and it soaks up that liquid, and it's just, it makes you gasp. You're like, and there are all these little details in the Double Life of Veronique too. There's these images of light a lot, and there's like this tea bag in a glass of water. And there's these moments when Veronica, especially, just moments of ecstasy that she has, where she's outside singing and all of a sudden it starts to rain, and she just is smiling, and she just keeps smiling. And then there's this other scene where she bounces this, I guess, this rubber ball or something, and all of a sudden there's this gold dust that comes out of nowhere, and she like tilts her head back and smiles like in this moment of ecstasy. And then later on, Veronique in France is just walking down the street, and there's this light, this shaft of light, and she puts her face into it. And it's like, it's these little details of ordinary life that are really imbued with so much meaning and beauty. And Insdorf talks about that too in her commentary, you know, how he infuses these small details, these small moments with immense meaning, and they become so profound. And so the film just feels like a dream. You feel like you're entering this dream when you watch it, and you don't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want it to end. I was so sad when it ended. And it was interesting, though, that Insdorf in the commentary said that Kieślowski actually hated filming. He hated filming the film. He liked collaborating, he liked working with other people, and he liked editing. He really loved the editing process. And so actually having to make the film, was actually quite, I guess, difficult for him, and he didn't enjoy it at all. And he really preferred editing. So, but whatever he did, the way he made these films come together, and Insdorf also said that he wanted like when it was going to premiere in France, it was going to be like in 17 different theaters, and he wanted a different ending for every theater. I mean, how I mean, I just smiled at that because I just thought that's so playful. That's so whimsical to even want to do that. To even want to have a different ending for every theater that it premiered in France. And and she said he edited the film like dozens of times. There were different versions, of the film, and he kept changing them and reimagining it, and before he finally agreed, on the version that we have now. So it's just I loved that audio commentary. Like it was so enriching to watch the film with all these added tidbits, and there's so many more that I can't even remember. I mean, it just really brought the film together for me, and I noticed things that I had overlooked, that I hadn't really thought about. And so again, Kieślowski's films, they exist on this plane of feeling and emotion and the irrational and um, the spiritual and the metaphysical. And he doesn't offer answers to these questions of identity and chance and connection. But to me, at the end of the day, it is about connection. That's what his films for me are about. And this is something that's very important to my own life is how do we connect with other people? What are the unseen ways that we connect? And I think that's interesting with the internet that when we put out our words, when I put out these podcasts, when I share my voice, when I share my feelings, I don't know the ways in which I may affect someone else. And the reverse is true, that other people who put things out on the internet or share their feelings or their thoughts or their writing or their art, they have no idea the way they may impact me or how they may affect my life. And so I think in the internet age, it's even more interesting. And Kieślowski explored some of this in his own work. He was very much interested in technology. In the Double Life of Veronique, she has headphones and she has a stereo, and in the Decalogue 1, there's a computer. He was interested in the way that technology impacts and changes our lives. And I think if you're going to talk about connection, then you can't not talk about social media and the internet and its potential to create those forms of connection. And so I think that in the end is what compels me so much about his work. Not just the dreaminess and the genius and everything that I've mentioned, which is all important, but he's really interested in how people are connected to one another and how you could feel connected without even knowing why. Like with Veronique and Veronica, they feel each other. They feel the presence of each other. And think about that even in the digital age now, where you may connect to someone online and you may never meet them in your real life. But you may send emails, or you may follow them, and you may love their work, and you can be connected without even realizing how that is or where that connection comes from. And so Veronica and Veronique, they sense each other. It's on that irrational, intuitive plane, that place of gut and intuition and feeling, and that's something that I deeply believe in. And yet they feel so connected to each other, and they don't understand why, you know. So there's all these unseen threads, these unseen cords that connect us to one another. And I always feel like Kieślowski's subject is really humanity, and it really is, you know, how we connect or don't connect, or you know, it's things that we can't put into words. I don't know. He just created sort of a singular body of work, I think, and I never get tired of watching his films. There's always a new revelation. There's always something that I missed before, something that I didn't see, and so his films are just, you're forever discovering them. You're forever um, they're always giving you new revelations and new discoveries, and I think they age well. I think they age very well, and I think that they certainly have a resonance in the modern world, and so I love his work so much, as you can tell, and I wanted in this podcast to try to explain it. Like, why is this film so important? Why is it my favorite? Why is he so important to me? You know, I will never meet this man. You know, I envy anyone that actually came in contact with him. I'll never know him. He died many years before I ever saw one of his films, and yet he has had a major impact on me, and he has helped me so much, and his films are a lifeline. They're a form of salvation. They awaken me, you know, and I find myself thinking about them a lot, and I just love him. I really do. So glad I rewatched the film yesterday, and I have a lot that I'm dealing with, a lot that I struggle with, and a lot of suffering, a lot of, you know, grief and all these things, and but then I'm also grateful that I can have moments of, you know, peace, of revelation, of beauty. And that's what his films really bring me, you know, are those moments of peace and awakening. And I'm just really forever, really forever grateful for that, honestly. So I'm going to stop here. I think I have talked about everything I can think of to talk about this film, but if you're able to see it, I definitely recommend it, and I can only hope that it moves you and affects you the way that it did me. And so thank you very much for listening. Until next time, keep watching films, keep, you know, discovering new movies and directors, and yeah, thanks so much for listening, and thanks for the support, and I really appreciate it. And I will stop here. Bye.